The war had ended. King's Landing was no more than a ruin of broken stones, ashes, and blood. The Iron Throne, once the symbol of power, had melted under Drogon's fire. Daenerys had fallen, stabbed in the heart by Jon Snow, a man who once loved her, who believed in her, but who couldn't ignore what she had become. Jon had been taken as a prisoner by the Unsullied, but Grey Worm, bitter and angry, eventually decided to sail away to Narth, leaving Jon's fate to the lords and ladies of Westeros. Arya, restless as ever, had already begun preparing to sail west to explore lands unknown, but she hadn't left yet. And then, something strange happened. Bran was crowned king of the Six Kingdoms, but he offered something unexpected to Jon, Arya, and even Tyrion: a chance to leave Westeros behind, a chance to start a new kingdom, one that was free from the old bloodshed, betrayals, and curses of the past. Jon was hesitant. He had already taken the Black again, choosing exile in the far north, beyond the Wall. But Arya visited him, told him she wasn't ready to leave, not yet. And then Daenerys returned. Not as the Mad Queen, not as a ruler. Drogon had flown her east to Valyria. Somehow, the dragonfire, the old blood magic, had brought her back, changed. She remembered everything: her death, Jon's betrayal. But she didn't feel rage anymore. Only loss, only confusion. She found Jon again, not to kill him, but to understand him, to ask why. Their meeting wasn't full of fire. It was quiet. Cold wind brushing past their faces, snowflakes falling. She sat in front of Jon and asked him what kind of world he thought was worth killing her for. Jon didn't have an answer. But Arya did. A world where people don't kneel because of a name, she said, where no one is burned for speaking their mind, where children don't die for the games of the High Lords. Daenerys listened. Jon stayed silent. But something inside him began to shift. Tyrion, free now but no longer a hand, heard of Daenerys' return and feared chaos. But when he met her again, he saw she was not the same woman who had destroyed King's Landing. She was quieter, softer, full of questions instead of commands. And so the idea was born, not to take back the throne, but to build something new. Not in Westeros, where every inch of land held a memory soaked in blood, but beyond the seas, in Essos, a land where slavery still lingered in shadows, where cities rose and fell by greed and steel. What if they built a kingdom not of conquest, but of choice? Jon agreed to lead only if he wasn't called king. Arya wanted to train others to fight, to protect. Daenerys, humbled, wished to teach, not rule. And so they began. They set sail with those who still believed in them, a few unsullied, still loyal to Daenerys, some wildlings who had followed Jon, a handful of healers, builders, and dreamers, tired of old kingdoms and looking for new beginnings. As their ships sailed into the unknown, the wind carried not the scent of war, but of change. Their ships reached the shores of an unclaimed land on the eastern edge of Essos, a place marked on old maps as forgotten and cursed. But when they stepped onto the soil, there was no curse, only silence. Mountains surrounded the bay like guardians, rivers flowed with clean water, and forests stood tall and thick. It was untouched, wild, and beautiful. For the first time, Jon Snow looked at land not as a battleground, but as a home. Arya, ever the scout, explored first. She found old ruins, deeper inland remains of a fallen city, long abandoned, its stone towers broken but not dead. They decided to settle near those ruins, using their stones to build something new, not castles. Homes, gardens, training yards, libraries, markets, a town of freedom, built from the bones of the past but shaped by a different vision. They named it Nyressa, a mix of Old Valyrian and Northern tongue, meaning new beginning. The work was hard. There were no servants, no lords commanding others. Even Daenerys carried stones with her bare hands. She tended to the sick, learned to plant vegetables, slept on the ground like everyone else. Every day was a test of survival and humility. Yet every night they gathered around fires, shared stories, and slowly, trust grew where fear used to live. Jon stayed distant at first. Guilt haunted him. He would look at Daenerys, see her scars, her quiet strength, and wonder if he had killed the wrong queen. But she never blamed him. One evening, as they stood watching the sun sink into the sea, she said softly, "Maybe you killed what I was becoming, not who I truly am." And that broke something in Jon, something heavy and cold, that had lived in his chest since that day in the throne room. Arya trained the youth who joined their growing town, boys and girls from wandering tribes, escaped slaves from the east, and orphans who had followed whispers of a land without kings. She didn't teach them to fight for glory, but to defend the peace they were building. She was the blade in the dark, protecting what they couldn't afford to lose. One night, a group of mercenaries arrived, gold in their eyes, weapons on their backs. They laughed at the town, mocked the kingless queen and the bastard builder. But when they tried to steal supplies, Arya was waiting. They never even saw her coming. One by one they fell silent, swift, deadly. Daenerys didn't celebrate the bloodshed, but she didn't mourn it either. "We offer peace," she said to the survivors, "but we will not kneel." Whispers began to spread across Essos. A new land where the old rules didn't matter. No thrones, no chains, no masters. Just survival, work, and freedom. Some called it madness. Others called it hope. People began arriving quietly at first, then in groups, former slaves, sellswords with no cause, maesters who had left their citadel in search of truth, and even a few from Westeros, disillusioned and tired. Tyrion arrived with a bottle of wine and sarcasm still sharp as ever. "So," he said, raising a cup, "this is the world you murdered a queen to build." Daenerys smiled, just slightly. "This is the world we're trying to earn." Tyrion stayed. He built a small theater, started teaching people how to debate, how to think, how to laugh. For once, he wasn't a hand or a prisoner, just a man with ideas. Jon found peace in the wild. He built homes with his hands, helped hunt food, taught the wildling children to read and speak both common tongue and Old Valyrian. For the first time, he didn't feel like a ghost walking through someone else's story. He was writing his own. But peace never lasts forever. Across the sea, whispers of Nyresa reached the ears of powerful men. Slavers, kings, and warlords who saw this rising land as a threat to their power. A kingdom without taxes, without rulers, dangerous. If Nyresa grew stronger, it could inspire others to rebel. One man in particular, a forgotten prince of the Giscari cities, began preparing ships not for trade, but for conquest. And so, while Jon, Arya, and Daenerys built a future from ruins, shadows of war quietly stirred again. The sun rose early in Nyresa. The mornings were quiet, broken only by bird song and the sound of hammers shaping new homes. Children ran through dirt paths, laughing, barefoot and free. Arya stood on a watchtower, scanning the horizon like she always did. She wasn't the kind to sit still, not when she could feel a storm brewing in the distance. And she was right. That same morning, a raven arrived, tired, wings bruised, scroll tied tight. Tyrion was the one to read it. His hands trembled just a little as he unfolded the message. The letter came from Volantis, written by a traitor who had passed through the Giscari lands. It warned of a fleet being built, not for Tyre, led by Prince Rogar, a cruel and forgotten ruler whose bloodline traced back to the old masters of Meereen. He saw Nyresa not as a peaceful town, but a rebellion, waiting to infect the rest of Essos. Tyrion handed the scroll to Jon and Daenerys, without saying a word. Jon read it once, then again. Jaw clenched. How many ships? "How many chips? Enough to burn this place to the ground," Tyrion muttered. "He sees you all as traitors to the order of things. Slaves building homes, lords living like commoners. It offends him." Arya, standing behind them, didn't flinch. "Then we don't wait for him to come." But Jon shook his head. "We're not conquerors. We didn't come here to start another war." Daenerys looked out at the fields where people worked with hope in their eyes. "But we can't let them die for our dream." They gathered a council that evening. No thrones, no crowns, just voices around a fire. Men and women spoke. Farmers, fighters, healers. They argued, they shouted, they questioned. Should they build an army? Should they hide? Should they flee? And then Daenerys stood. "I burned cities once because I believed I was freeing people," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But I only replaced one kind of fear with another. I won't do that again, not here. But I will not let another tyrant burn what we built. If Rhaegar comes, we will meet him, not with fire, but with unity. We will fight only if we must." Jon nodded. "We won't raise an army of conquest. We'll raise a shield of protection." Arya, ever ready, added, "And if they come with fire, we give them cold steel in return." So preparations began. The town changed overnight. The builders began crafting walls low and hidden between the trees. The hunters became scouts. Arya trained night and day, teaching ambush tactics, silence, survival. She didn't need a castle or banners. She just needed shadows to disappear into and knives that never missed. Jon trained the able-bodied men and women who had never held a sword, now learning to stand together. He made no speeches. His presence was enough. He fought beside them, slept beside them, bled beside them. And in those quiet hours, he became something else. Not a king, not a warrior, a leader people trusted with their lives. Daenerys took a different path. She visited every home, every family. She listened. She comforted. She stood in the middle of fields during meetings and reminded people why they had come. Not to die for a place, but to live free in it. Drogon, who had returned from the mountains, circled the skies, not attacking, just watching, a silent warning to anyone who dared come close. Tyrion built traps, defenses, escape tunnels. He turned the taverns into shelters, the old ruins into choke points. If they think we're weak, let them. It'll be their last mistake. Weeks passed. Then, one night, Arya returned from the coast. She had seen them sails on the horizon. Dozens of them. "They're coming," she said simply. The town didn't panic. They lit no fires that night. No tears. Just silence. A kind of quiet resolve that spoke louder than any war drum. Jon stood at the front gate, sword on his back, eyes fixed on the distant sea. Daenerys stood beside him, hand resting gently on Drogon's neck. Arya vanished into the trees, her blades ready. They didn't choose this war, but now that it was here, they would face it not as rulers, but as a people together. The first ships arrived at dawn. Their black sails like wings of vultures against the red sky. Prince Rhaegar's fleet stretched far across the water, blocking out the horizon. Their ships weren't for trade. They were armored, heavy, loaded with soldier-slavers, mercenaries, and war beasts. From the cliffs above the coast, Arya watched them silently, her face cold and unreadable. She counted over 40 warships, maybe more. Back in Nerissa, no horns sounded. No panic broke out. The town moved calmly as they had planned. Mothers took children to the hidden tunnels Tyrion had built beneath the ruins. Fighters took their positions in the forests and high rocks. Everything had been prepared in whispers, not shouts. This wasn't a castle with high walls. This was a trap waiting to be sprung. Jon stood at the center of the valley path, where the enemy would have to come through. He wore no armor, just his old furs. Longclaws at his side. Beside him stood Daenerys, dressed in plain clothes, no crown, no symbol of power. Only Drogon above, perched on a cliff, his wings tight, eyes burning. Rogar's scouts arrived first arrogant, loud, expecting fear. They found Jon instead, and his message was clear: turn back, there's no throne here, no gold, only people who want to be left alone. They laughed. By nightfall, the attack began. Rogar's army pushed forward, burning the fields as they marched. Their fires reached the edge of Nerissa, but they never entered. As soon as they crossed into the dense woods, Arya's shadows came alive. Silent figures in dark cloaks dropped from trees, blades slicing through necks before the soldiers could scream. Traps snapped under their feet spikes, nets, pit holes filled with sharpened branches. The army stumbled, confused, not knowing where the enemy was. They expected a straight fight. What they got was death in the trees. Rogar watched from the hill, fuming. "Send the beasts," he ordered. Caged creatures, massive dogs, trained to kill, were unleashed into the forest. But the forest belonged to Arya now. The hounds died without reaching the edge. Then came the fire. Rogar sent flaming arrows into the woods, hoping to burn out the defenders. But as the flames rose, so did Drogon. He roared once loud enough to shake the trees. Then he dove. But he didn't burn the enemy army. Instead, he created a wall of fire between the forest and the town, cutting off the battlefield. Soldiers trapped in the blaze began to panic, and that's when Jon led the charge, not as a king, but as a brother to every soul in Nerissa. He fought like the North itself, cold, relentless. His sword moved with purpose. No fury, no show, just death where it was needed. The people followed. Farmers with axes, former slaves with spears. Women who had once feared their own shadows now stood tall beside him. Daenerys stood behind the front lines, not as a queen commanding fire, but healing the wounded, pulling people out of danger, refusing to be idle while others bled. She had destroyed cities once. Now she was fighting to protect one. Tyrion, in his own way, fought too, calling out plans, moving supplies, using everything he had ever learned to outthink Rogar's every move. "Let him have soldiers," he muttered. "We have something better, people with nothing to lose." By the second day, Rogar was furious. His army was thinning not because of numbers, but morale. They weren't fighting peasants. They were fighting ghosts, blades in the dark, dragons that didn't attack directly, but always circled above, waiting. Finally, he ordered a full push straight through the valley. It was what Jon had been waiting for. They let the army come deep into the valley before revealing the truth. The riverbanks had been weakened. With one signal, Tyrion detonated the hidden charges they had buried near the stream. The river flooded instantly, drowning half the valley and trapping the rest of the army in knee-deep water. And that's when Arya struck from behind. The enemy was shattered. Those who survived ran. Some begged. Others dropped their weapons and fled into the woods, never to return. Rogar himself was captured. He was dragged to the center of Nerissa, bloodied, broken, face full of disbelief. He looked at Jon, Daenerys, and Arya standing together, not as rulers, but as protectors of something he couldn't understand. "A kingdom of peasants," he spat. "No," Daenerys said quietly. "A kingdom of the free." Rogar was locked in one of the old stone towers, chained but alive. Jon wanted to execute him right away, end the threat before it could rise again. Arya agreed. She had seen too many second chances end in betrayal. But Daenerys said, "No, we didn't build this place to repeat old mistakes," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Let the people decide what justice looks like." And for once, they did. A gathering was called, not a trial with lords in robes or gold-lined thrones, but a circle of farmers, fighters, builders, and elders. Everyone who had bled for Nerissa had a voice. Rogar was brought before them, weak and filthy, but still arrogant. He spat on the ground and mocked their counsel. "You think you're free? You're just animals pretending to be kings." But his words had no power here. A young woman stood, a former slave from Marine who had once served Rogar's house. Her back still carried the scars of his whips. She looked him in the eyes and said, "We don't want a king. We want a life, and you don't get to take that from us anymore." The crowd didn't cheer. They stayed silent. Jon stepped forward, sword in hand. "You came to burn us, but we won't become what you are." He raised the blade, and this time he didn't hesitate. Rogar died quickly. That night there was no celebration, only quiet fires and tired faces. They had survived, but it came at a cost. Graves were dug, names spoken softly, tears shed in corners. For every enemy they buried, they also buried friends. It wasn't a victory, it was survival. Days passed. The fields that had burned were replanted. Homes were rebuilt. The people worked harder now, not from fear, but pride. They had fought not to conquer, but to defend what they had made with their own hands. Tyrion sat under a tree one morning, watching children chase each other through the grass. He sipped watered-down wine and shook his head. "Well, we did it," he muttered. "We actually built something better." Arya stood nearby, sharpening her blades, always watching. "It's not over. It never is." He smiled without humor. "You'd make a lovely queen, you know." Arya snorted. "Try saying that again, and I'll cut your tongue out." They both laughed, and for once, it felt real. Jon walked through the village like a man still searching for something. Peace didn't come easy to him. He had spent most of his life preparing for war, surviving betrayal, carrying the weight of dead men's dreams. But here, no one called him king. No one bowed. Children waved, women offered bread. Men nodded with quiet respect. Men nodded with quiet respect. Still, he carried Longclaw everywhere, just in case. One evening, Daenerys found him sitting alone on the cliff where they first watched the ships arrive. She sat beside him, silent for a long time. Finally she asked, "Do you regret killing me?" Jon didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. "Every night. And yet, I think it saved us both." She looked at the horizon. "I used to dream of ruling, of changing the world. And when I finally had power, I burned it all down." "You've changed," Jon said. "So have you." Their hands touched. Not love, something else. Shared pain, maybe. Understanding. Two people who had carried too many ghosts and still stood up anyway. Arya joined them at dawn, her face serious. "There's talk in the east. A city is rising. One ruled by former allies of Rogar. They're gathering what's left of the old slaver cities, quietly, slowly, slowly." Jon stood. "Then we prepare." Daenerys frowned. "Another war?" Arya shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But we don't wait. We don't hope they leave us alone. We build stronger, smarter, together." And so, Nyresa grew, not just in size, but in strength. They began training not just soldiers, but scholars, builders who knew how to defend with walls and words, farmers who knew the land better than any general, and spies trained by Arya herself to watch the world and warn of danger before it knocked on their door. They weren't building a kingdom anymore. They were building a legacy, one the world couldn't ignore much longer. Months passed, and Nyresa thrived like never before. The crops grew taller than a man, the homes stretched wider, and the streets buzzed with voices from all corners of Essos and beyond. What began as a hidden refuge had turned into a symbol of something greater: freedom, resilience, unity. People arrived by the hundreds now. Refugees, outcasts, even nobles who had lost faith in the crowns they once served. But as the city rose, so did the dangers lurking in its shadow. Arya had her spies moving across Essos, and the news they brought was dark. In the city of Velak, far to the east, Former slave masters, mercenary captains, and broken lords had gathered under a single banner, the gilded flame, a secretive order promising to restore the natural order of power and bloodlines. They blamed Nyresa for spreading rebellion. They saw its survival as an infection. Their leader was a woman named Serenia Var, a cruel genius and former noble of Yunkai. She had survived Daenerys' first campaign years ago, fled, and rebuilt herself with fire in her heart. Unlike Rogar, she wasn't loud. She didn't waste armies on brute force. She used influence, manipulation, spies, and whispers. She turned cities without war by turning their leaders against each other. When Arya read the report aloud in the council, the room grew cold. "She wants to crush us from the inside," Arya said. "She's already spreading lies, that we're hiding weapons, that we kill nobles, that we plan to overthrow every city from here to Westeros." Tyrion sighed. "She's clever. Make the world fear Nyresa, and it'll destroy us for her." Jon stood. "So we tell the truth. We send messengers to every free city. We invite them here. Let them see who we are." Daenerys agreed. "And if Serenia sends her blades, we'll be ready." So they opened their gates, not for battle, but diplomacy. Leaders from Braavos, Qarth, Lys, and even Dorne were invited to Nyresa. They were shown the schools, the farms, the way people chose their own work, and voices mattered regardless of name or title. Many left impressed. Others left frightened. Freedom, after all, was dangerous to those who ruled by fear. Meanwhile, Arya had begun training a new order. The Quiet Blades. Not an army, not assassins, just watchers, protectors. Eyes in the dark who listened more than they spoke. They slipped into cities quietly, tracked Serenia's influence, uncovered hidden networks of spies and corrupt merchants. But Serenia was always a step ahead. She poisoned an ambassador from Lys who had just left Nyresa, framing Nyresa for the murder. Within weeks, angry voices rose in the east. Ships turned away from their ports. Traders stopped coming. Serenia's lies were working. Jon wanted to respond with strength. "If she wants war in the shadows, then let's finish it in the light," he said. But Daenerys stopped him. "If we act out of fear, we give her what she wants, a reason to burn us." Tyrion added, "We don't need to fight the lies. We need to expose the truth." So they planned something bold. Daenerys would travel east openly. She would meet with Serenia face to face, not as a queen, but as a symbol of what Nyresa stood for. It was dangerous, a trap maybe, but it would also show the world that Nyresa feared no tyrant. Jon hated the idea. "You could die," he said. "I already have," Daenerys answered softly, "and I came back to fix what I broke. If I run from this now, I don't deserve the second chance I was given." Arya insisted on going with her. "If this is a trap, I'll be the blade in the dark that ends it." They set sail 2 nights later, Daenerys, Arya, and a small group of trusted followers. No armies, just words and courage. Jon stood on the dock watching them go, heart heavy. "Don't die," he whispered to the wind. But Serenia was already waiting, and she had plans of her own. Because for her, this wasn't just politics, it was revenge. Daenerys and Arya's ship arrived at Velrak under tight skies, the sun hidden behind grey clouds. The city loomed head-sharp towers of red stone, black banners flying high with the mark of the gilded flame, a golden phoenix rising from fire. It looked grand, but Arya saw it for what it was, a place built on fear. The streets were clean, but empty. Soldiers stood on every corner, watching, not protecting. They were met at the harbor by Serenia's envoy, a pale man with silver rings on every finger and eyes like snake glass. "Lady Var awaits," he said with a bow, lips curled in mock respect. "You are most welcome." Arya whispered to Daenerys as they walked. "This place smells like a trap." Daenerys nodded, calm but cautious. "Then let's make her choke on it." They were taken to a hall carved from black stone, firelit and silent. Serenia sat on a raised platform, not a throne, but a message. She wore no crown, only a white silk robe and gold chains that shimmered when she moved. Her beauty was striking, but her smile was colder than any snow Jon had ever seen. "Khaleesi," Serenia said softly, or should I say, ghost of a queen. Daenerys stepped forward without flinching. "I came to talk, not to play games." "Oh, but talking is the game," Serenia replied. "You want to convince the world you're not dangerous, that Nyresa is just a dream, but dreams burn when people wake up." Arya's hand was already close to her blade. "We built a home," Daenerys said. "Steady. We don't want your cities. We don't want your cities. We want peace." Serenia stood, walking slowly around the hall. "And yet your peace is a threat. You show people a life without chains, and suddenly they question who they serve. That makes you dangerous, Daenerys Stormborn. Not because you fight, but because you exist." Daenerys stared at her. "Then why invite me here?" Serenia turned, smiling. "Because if I kill you in battle, you become a martyr. But if I make you bend the knee, your dream dies quietly. Forgotten." Arya stepped forward, eyes like daggers. "Try it, and you'll be dead before your guards can scream." Serenia raised a hand, amused. "Ah, the wolf. I've heard of you. Killer of the Night King. Ghost in the north. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Arya Stark?" Arya didn't answer. "A threat that hasn't lost enough," Serenia said softly. Yet, before Arya could move, the hall exploded in noise, soldiers storming in from hidden doors, crossbows raised. They surrounded the two women instantly. Daenerys raised her hands, calm. "So this was your plan?" Serenia stepped back to her platform. "You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you. Or until your precious Nyresa crumbles without you." But what she didn't know was that Arya had already signaled her watchers. The quiet blades were inside the city, hidden, silent, and waiting. Back in Nyresa, Jon got the Raven that night. Daenerys and Arya captured. Velrock is preparing for war. Jon didn't sleep. He gathered the council, fists clenched, voice low but deadly. "I told her not to go." Tyrion paced. "If Serenia's keeping them alive, it means she wants to humiliate them. We can use that." Jon's voice broke the silence. "We rescue them. We strike before Serenia makes her move." Some argued against it. Too risky, too far. But Jon wasn't asking. He was already preparing the ship. Not with a full army, just a small force. Skilled, loyal, ready to die if needed. "You don't win wars with numbers," he said. "You win them with people who don't give up." As they sailed across the sea, Arya made her own move. She had memorized the guards' shifts, the weak spot in their route, and the location of her weapons hidden in her boot, untouched because they underestimated her. On the 5th night, she made her escape. She killed 2 guards before they hit the ground. She reached Daenerys, unlocked her chains. Daenerys blinked at her, stunned. "You actually came back for me." Arya smirked. "You're not dying in a cell. Not on my watch." They ran through narrow tunnels, flames rising behind them. Serenia had realized what was happening. Her fury echoed through the halls. But when they reached the exit, a figure stood waiting. Serenia herself saw drawn, eyes wild. "I gave you a choice," she hissed. Daenerys stepped forward, "and we made ours." The corridor shook with the sound of distant fire, soldiers shouting in confusion, metal clashing beyond the walls. But inside the narrow stone passage, everything was still. Daenerys faced Serenia, their eyes locked, 2 women shaped by war, fire, and loss. But only one of them had changed. "You could have been great," Serenia said, her voice low, sharp as her blade. "But you chose weakness. You chose mercy. That's why you'll die here." Arya stepped forward, blades in hand, every muscle tense. She's not dying today. Serenia moved first. Her sword flashed like lightning, striking toward Daenerys. But Arya was faster. She blocked the blow, steel clashing in a shower of sparks. The two danced through the corridor, blades ringing, feet stepping across blood-streaked stone. Daenerys backed away, breath caught in her throat. She had faced dragons, armies, betrayal. But this was different. This wasn't about power. It was personal. Serenia wasn't fighting for a throne. She was fighting to kill hope itself. Arya was a shadow in motion, ducking, rolling, striking. But Serenia was skilled, too skilled. She countered every move with brutal precision. "You kill monsters," Serenia spat, "but I build them." She slammed Arya against the wall, blade pressed to her neck. "Let's see what your silence sounds like in death." But then a roar split the sky. The ceiling cracked, and through the hole above, Drogon descended, eyes blazing, wings stretched wide. Jon Snow leapt from his back, crashing into the corridor like a thunderbolt. He landed hard, sword drawn, rage burning in his eyes. "Step away," he growled. Serenia turned, eyes narrowing. Ah, the fallen king. Jon didn't waste time. He swung Longclaw with such force that Serenia barely blocked it. The impact sent her stumbling. Arya slipped free and grabbed Daenerys, pulling her to safety. Now it was Jon and Serenia, north and east, ice and fire. Their blades collided again and again, one fighting to destroy, the other to protect. Serenia fought like a viper, quick and cruel. Jon fought like the storm, powerful, relentless. He didn't speak, he didn't hesitate, and finally he broke through. With one clean strike, he drove Longclaw into Serenia's side. She gasped, blood rushing from her lips. "You don't get to win," she choked. Jon stepped closer, voice like a whisper. "We already did." She collapsed, her blade clattering against the floor, her war ending not with an explosion but with silence. Arya pulled Jon and Daenerys through the tunnel exit, where Tyrion and the rest of the rescue team waited with stolen horses. They galloped into the night, disappearing into the wild, fire rising behind them as Velrock descended into chaos. By the time the sun rose, the city was burning. Without Serenia, the gilded flame fell apart. Her followers turned on each other. Leaders vanished, and whispers of her death spread like wildfire. Some said she was killed by a dragon. Others said a ghost girl slit her throat in the dark. No one really knew, but one thing was clear: Nyrissa had survived again. Back home they returned to a hero's welcome. No banners, no crowns, just people waiting with open arms and teary eyes. Daenerys hugged the children who ran up to her. Arya disappeared into the crowd, smiling faintly. And Jon, he just stood quietly, watching the city breathe. Later that night, the three of them sat around a fire. No speeches, just silence, broken by the crackling wood. Daenerys looked at Jon. "You came. I always would," he said simply. Arya smirked. "Next time, let's just send a raven." They all laughed quiet, tired laughter. But it was real. Tyrion joined them with a bottle of wine and 4 cups. "So," he said, pouring, "what now? You've built a kingdom, survived 2 wars, killed tyrants. What else is left?" Daenerys looked around at the children playing in the distance, the people dancing, the sound of music echoing through the hills. "We live," she said. Jon nodded. "We let peace grow." Arya raised her cup. "And if someone tries to take it, we fight," they all said together. Nyrissa would never be a perfect kingdom. It would face more threats, more doubts, more pain. But it was theirs, built not on bloodlines, but on choices, not on crowns, but on courage. And sometimes